so excited to chat with you today and have a dialogue. Let's get started. Who is this woman that you see here? Who is she? Rosa Parks? What's she known for? That's what you sound like. One person, what is she known for? Yes, didn't get up and go to the back of the bus, which might have sparked what movement? The civil rights movement, right? And if you're familiar with her life, she's been honored in so many ways. We've got stamps, we've got books. There's a commemorative statue of her outside of the US Capitol. President Obama has sat in the seat that she sat in, sort of reflect on that. We got a tweet from Michelle Obama honoring her courage, her tenacity in refusing to give up her seat in Montgomery during the civil rights era. Who is this young lady? Anybody know who this young woman is? Etta? Not quite. Anna? Not Anna. Katherine Johnson? Not Katherine Johnson. Is it Rosa Parks? No, it's not. An even younger Rosa Parks. Someone who desegregated schools? Not Talithia. I was not that cute as a little girl. Her name was Claudette Colvin, and at 15 years of age, she refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, on the same bus that Rosa Parks would ride on 9 months later. And so it's interesting that we don't know a lot about Claudette. She doesn't have a lot of books about her, doesn't have any stamps, doesn't have a commemorative holiday where we honor her, and yet she took this action even before Rosa Parks. And in some ways, she was a hidden figure because her actions haven't been as honored or recognized as Rosa's. There are lots of reasons for that. One is that because of her age, she was 15 years old when she was dragged off of a bus in Montgomery, and she sort of left kicking and screaming. You know, she was upset as a 15-year-old. Her mother had passed away. She lived with her dad. Her dad raised her and her siblings. And so when people in Montgomery were organizing the movement and they wanted to sort of galvanize behind a person, she sort of wasn't seen as suitable because it seemed like there were too many flaws that could be brought out in her life that would distract from the movement. So Rosa Parks was chosen for several reasons. One was because she came from sort of a middle-class black family. She was fair-skinned, and so they thought she would be more accepted as a symbol of the movement. She was older. She was in her 30s when she refused to give up her seat. So she had a certain temperament about her, where in her refusal, you'll notice even in some of the pictures, it was very peaceful, right? And so it was orchestrated in a way to use her as a symbol for the movement, and strategically decided not to use Claudette. But Claudette was one of the 5 women who was actually on the case against the suit for the city of Montgomery. So it was her case that actually helped to end segregation on city buses in Montgomery, not Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks actually wasn't one of those plaintiffs. It was Claudette, whose case went eventually before the Supreme Court, where they upheld the decision that buses in Montgomery should be segregated. And so I'm going to show you a clip from the movie Hidden Figures. Many of you have seen it, some of you may not. So let's look at a clip of that now.
So we have the vehicle's speed, the launch window, and for argument's sake, the landing zone is the Bahamas. Should be enough to figure the go, no go?
Yeah, in theory, sir.
We need to be past theory at this point.
We'll be able to calculate a go, no go with that information.
When exactly is that going to happen?
Catherine? Have a go at it?
The goal point for re-entry is 2,990 miles from where we want Colonel Glenn to land. If we assume that's the Bahamas, 544 miles per hour of 46.56 degrees, 2,990 miles. Okay, so that puts your landing zone at 5.0667 degrees north, 77.3333 degrees west, which is here. Give or take 20 square miles.
I like your numbers.
So many of you have seen the movie Hidden Figures, and it portrays the experiences of these three women, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan, who worked as human computers at NASA during the space race, where we as a country had really come together to try to figure out how we could beat Russia to the moon. And so these women, among others, worked as NASA's supercomputers. And their stories are compelling, and it makes for an amazing story that Hollywood can tell. But they weren't the only three women that worked for NASA, and you saw that in the movie. You saw that there were groups of African-American women. There are also groups of white women who also worked as human computers. I want to highlight a few others to you today. One of those is Anna Easley. Anna joined NASA in 1955, worked for 34 years. So a long time woman who worked at NASA. She wrote computer code for the Centaur rocket stage. It's been used in over 200 launches, the code that she wrote. And actually her code was the basis for future codes that were used in military and in other communication satellites. But it's interesting, when she came to NASA, she wanted to further her education, which was one of the benefits of working at NASA, is that they would pay for you to go get classes. I see some heads shaking, like absolutely. And so some of these women would go and ask to get support to take additional math classes at community colleges, and they were denied. And so Anna was one of the women who actually paid on her own to take some of those classes and further her education, and never actually got reimbursed for them. Christine Darden is still alive today. You see a picture with her and some mathematicians at a Siam gathering here recently. And she also spoke at the joint meetings, the joint math meetings this past January. Some of you may have been at the joint meetings to hear her talk. She joined also in the late 60s, had a master's in engineering. Christine was qualified for an engineering position, which is what she applied for, and got denied once they realized she was a black woman. They moved her to the computing section where the other black women worked, but they still took advantage of her engineering knowledge. So she would get interesting assignments that would pull from her engineering background, even though she wasn't considered an engineer. And so she actually confronted her supervisor. She's sort of a bold, feisty woman, if you've ever met her in person. Like she is, you know, still has it. And she actually said she wanted to be trained as an engineer, and they eventually allowed her to go to that training. She's written more than 50 articles. And she continued her career at NASA. She eventually got a Ph.D. and started working there in leadership roles in 1990. In the 90s, she became a program management officer. She's had a long, successful career with NASA. And so as we start to talk today about hidden figures, you know, as mathematicians, we first have to sort of define what we mean by a hidden figure. Here's what I mean when I talk about a hidden figure. It's a person who makes an impact without necessarily making their presence known. And so their presence might be concealed somehow by their circumstance, but not necessarily by choice. Right? It's sort of hidden for us. And so when I think about the field of mathematics in particular, and I think about women who, for me, had been hidden, as a child growing up in Georgia, I did not know any black women who had PhDs in math. I didn't know anyone who had masters. I didn't know ones with bachelors. I just didn't know black women. I didn't know black men who had PhDs in math. And so that was sort of a foreign land to me. These women were hidden. I want to highlight a couple of them for you. The first African-American woman to get a PhD in math was Martha Euphemia Lofton Hayes. She got that in 1943 from Catholic University. She's from Washington, D.C. And Euphemia was a devout Catholic. She actually spent most of her life working for the Catholic Church in addition to serving at Catholic University. I first found out about euphemia when I got to Harvey Mudd. It was talking with a colleague, Dagan Karp, and I was like, really? She was black? Because I thought, she wasn't from the picture. And so he was the one who helped me do a little more research. And, I always knew about Evelyn Boyd Granville, and who's the second African-American woman to get her Ph.D., who I believe is still alive, born in 1924. Yes, she is. And so what's so interesting about Evelyn, as the second black woman, she's had an expansive career. She worked some years at IBM, retired there, taught for over 30 years, taught in particular at Fisk University, where the budding Etta Falconer was a student. And so Dr. Falconer was actually mentored by Dr. Granville while an undergraduate student at Fisk. She got her PhD from Yale in 1949. It's hard to get a degree from Yale in 2017. I can only imagine what it was like in 1949. And then lastly, I'll highlight for you the third woman to get a PhD in math, Marjorie Lee Brown from University of Michigan in 1949. She was born in 1914 in Tennessee, a gifted mathematician. She saved up, attended Howard University for undergraduate, and eventually went back to New Orleans to take a teaching position. She worked in New Orleans for 1 year before deciding that she really wanted to advance in mathematics and applied to the University of Michigan. Notice she finished her master's in 1939, and it took her 10 years to finish her PhD. Right? And so we can probably think of a lot of reasons why it would take a long time, but at that time, there weren't a lot of women of color who were in PhD programs. There weren't a lot of women in PhD programs. And so I imagine what they had to go through was much more difficult than even what I had to go through. And so these women and their amazing stories, I didn't know this as a 10, 12, 14-year-old girl. And, I was okay in math, but it didn't really, I was okay in English. Like, it wasn't that math was just, I didn't get goosebumps doing math. I didn't go to sleep on my, math book, drooling. It wasn't quite that type of love relationship. It was like, have I done my homework? Great, it's done. Okay, what do I need to read? And so I didn't know these women, and I didn't know about their stories. And I think had I known, I would have been even more motivated and more inspired. And so part of my goal in life is to really make sure that those stories live on. Let me tell you a little bit about my background and how I did come to sort of a love relationship with mathematics. It happened because I got a job after my sophomore year of high school as a 16-year-old, and I worked at a grocery store as a cashier. Now, I know some of you young people, you don't remember back in the day of grocery stores where you had to punch in. Raise your hand if you remember how they had to punch in your amount, hit the and then the register would come out and hit you, and then you'd have to take the money out and push it back. We didn't even take credit cards at the grocery store I worked at. That's how current Columbus, Georgia was. And so at my grocery store, I was often dealing with money and numbers, and being a cashier isn't the most exciting job. It paid $4.15 an hour. But it wasn't super exciting. And so I would pass the time by seeing if the time it took me to take someone's money and type it in and get change, if I could figure out how much I owed them. Right? So if you handed me $5, I'd try to do mental math, not quite Art Benjamin level mental math. It was just slightly below that, really, slightly below. But I try to do some mental math to figure out the change before, the cash register would do it for me. And so I got used to doing these numbers in my head just because it was part of my job. And even though I was taking analysis and AP calculus in my junior and senior year, every day that I'd go to work, I was sort of reinforcing these basic skills. And often when we get students in our classroom, what do we complain most about? They can't add. They can take a derivative, but they can't add, right? I know there's nobody in your school. I know it's just Harvey Mudd students. But, really, they're so bright, and yet the basics. And so every day I'd go to work, and I was getting drilled and adding and subtracting. And so, ma'am, this was 35% off. Okay, let me do, okay, okay, there you go. Right? And so I was sort of used to doing this mental math in my head. The first time I knew of a black person with a degree in math was Dwayne Wayne. He was fictional, but he counts. He totally counts. How many of you remember From a Different World? Derivative of the Cosby Show? We won't talk about that. But okay, A Different World. And so Dwayne Wayne was this cool black guy. He wore glasses. You know, I wore glasses all my life. I loved that he had cool glasses because mine were so far from cool. And he majored in math at Hillman College. And I was like, I'm gonna go to Hillman? I didn't know it didn't exist. I was gonna go, I was gonna find Dwayne Wayne, I was gonna marry him. My husband's here somewhere, I don't think he's made it in, so we'll continue on with this slide. And so, you know, that was sort of my goal, was to, how could I find a Dwayne Wayne? But he was also the first black person I saw with some inclination toward mathematics. Right? And I love seeing them. They'd show them in math and calculus class and doing math problems. And so I ended up at Spelman College, and I started in a summer transition program, the Summer Science and Engineering program. This formed from a partnership between Spelman and NASA in 1987. And they wanted to increase the number of women, and underrepresented women in particular, that were pursuing STEM degrees. And so NASA partnered with Spelman to choose scholars who were particularly going to major in STEM, who would get summer opportunities at NASA and would encourage them to go on to graduate school. And so in 1996, the summer after my senior year in high school, I ended up in this program. And it was originally sort of a brainchild of some of the faculty at Spelman, Etta Falconer being one of them. That was the first summer that I met her. And she reminded me of my grandmother, much like the pictures that you see, just sort of soft-spoken, easygoing, but fierce. You know, she sort of carried a certain gravitas to her. And so coming out of high school, we didn't really think we were grown. You know, we didn't really know we were adults. And so this summer program had a lot of structure. We had a 9 o'clock curfew. We took a class in C++. I think Dr. Mulcahy's out there, he can verify. We took a calculus course. We worked in groups. We slept in dorms together. And there was no going over to Morehouse. Like, don't cross the street. Don't think you're gonna go over there with those guys. So it was very much an environment that was conducive to learning, to working together in community, to building community, and to really putting a focus on education. We were kind of brainwashed. And so, but it was very intentional. It was intentional. And so when I showed up to Spelman in the fall, I had this group of women who I'd had this summer experience with. And at the end of the summer, we had signed up for classes. We were all in the same classes. They put us in the same classes together. And so we had this built-in study group. And then what was so sad, we'd be going into our rooms at 9 o'clock. We'd be like, oh, it's 9 o'clock. I think I need to get back to my room. You know, folks are like, where are you going? I don't know. I just feel like I got to go. Like, I can't be out. I shouldn't be out, you know? And so all of us, and so we'd be there studying, and, you know, the other women were just like, y'all are crazy. We're out here. We're on our own. I was like, I don't know. I just feel like I got to study. So Dr. Falconer brainwashed us. I just want to put that out there for you to know. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She was born in 1933 in Tupelo, Mississippi, passed away in 2002 at the age of 69. We lost her kind of early. But she got her Ph.D. from Emory, got a master's from University of Wisconsin, and got that BA at Fisk in 1953. She was the 10th African-American woman to get a Ph.D. in math. She was 36 years old when she finished her Ph.D. Dr. Lee Lorch was also one of her mentors. He's famous for helping women, people of color, be successful in mathematics. He chaired the Fisk math department. He encouraged her to pursue graduate courses. She actually finished the undergraduate math major in her junior year and took grad level courses all her entire senior year. She initially wanted to teach high school math after she graduated, but Dr. Lorch and Evelyn Granville encouraged her to go to grad school, where she started at University of Wisconsin. Her experience there was tough because there were no black professors, there were no female professors. Most of the graduate students were men. None of them talked to her except the Asians and those who were coming from Africa. And so she had a very isolating experience. She tells a story of teaching her first class and walking in and students laughing because they thought it was a joke that this 19-year-old was about to teach them mathematics, and how she had to work so hard that semester to instill confidence in her students, right, and gain their respect, which she eventually did. But even though she was invited to stay at Wisconsin for her Ph.D., she didn't want to stay in that environment. It was a little bit too toxic, and she decided to return home, worked for a few years, and eventually finished her Ph.D. at Emory, and then joined the Spelman Math Department. And now at Spelman, she created the WISE Scholar Program, several scholarship programs with NASA. She's fundamental in starting the honors program there. She's one of the founders of NAM, the National Association of Mathematicians, which supports Black mathematicians in particular. So she's had an amazing career, even in those 69 years, and her impact has lasted definitely beyond her lifespan. And so when I think about Etta Falconer, when I think about her name, and even what the word Falconer means, anybody know, what does Falconer mean? The definition of a Falconer. Yes, someone who...
Well, who trains a falcon.
Yes, someone who trains a falcon. Absolutely. Someone who keeps, trains, and hunts with falcons or other birds of prey. And if you think about it, in a way, that's exactly what she did. That's exactly what her life was. She spent her entire life training her young women to soar. You like how I tried to pull that in? I was reaching. That was like a 2-hour slide right there. I'm just gonna put it out there. Like, ooh, Falconer, okay, trained bird, I was not a bird. Yes, so she spent her life training young women to soar. That just deserves an applause all by itself. No, don't worry. Those 2 hours last night were worth it. And so I want to spend the rest of the talk really talking about the Falconer mindset and maybe some tidbits that we can take away that we can even employ with some of our students today in our own classroom. Right? And so these will hopefully be strategies that you can use to encourage your students to not only develop their mathematical talent, but also to pursue the mathematical sciences. All right, so let's get in. Falconer mindset number 1 is to build an inclusive community. Now this sounds sort of like, of course, yes, build inclusive communities. But often, the math community in particular can be quite exclusive. Right? Some of our larger institutions have weed out courses, right? It's not sort of set up to bring everybody to the table and help everybody advance. And yet that was her mentality, was how can we go about building an inclusive community? When I started in the NASA WISE Scholars Program, Women in Science and Engineering, it had a couple of amazing components that helped us to be successful in math. First, we had these mentoring relationships not only with each other, but with all the women who had come before us, right? All the other graduates. And wherever they'd gone off to graduate school, we were able to be connected to them. We also got connected with scientists at NASA. So every summer that we went to work at NASA, we'd be paired with a research mentor and then also sort of a mentor who would help help us navigate NASA, but also navigate that process of thinking about and applying to graduate school. It gave us a strong network of Black women who were in science and engineering, sort of a built-in cohort of women. And it also was very non-competitive. I mean, I don't know about your students. Mudd students tend to be supportive at times, but it's very different being in an environment where everybody was there for me to succeed. Right? And I could ask anybody any question. Nobody was going to not share with me for fear that I might get a higher grade than them. Right? And so this community of scholars enabled us to be successful, enabled us to work together for a common experience. And then she was able to instill this expectation that we go to graduate school. Right? We just sort of came in knowing that, what are you going to do next? I guess I'm going to go to graduate school. That's what everybody else is doing. You know, it was just sort of like, that's what we expect you to do. One thing that I never thought about, and I realized this later, not when I got to Howard for a master's, but when I got to Rice. One thing that I took for granted at Spelman was that at Spelman, everybody looked like me. Everybody was a woman. Everybody was mostly some shade of black. And so when I went into a math classroom, I didn't really think about my gender or my race. I had the space to just think about math. I didn't look around and be like, oh, so-and-so, ooh, who's that guy? It was none of that. And so coming into a space without having to think about baggage really freed everybody to focus more intently on math. And I only realized that I was lacking that feeling when I got to Rice, because Howard was also, a historically black college. I got to Rice, all of a sudden I walked in the classroom and I was like, ooh, I am the only woman. I am the only black person in this room. And so, not that that was a big deal, but that was always in my head, right? It was always sort of this voice. And so, even as I was, as I thought to ask a question, whereas at Spelman or Howard, I'd be like, hey, I have no idea what you're doing. Oh, no, I don't understand. Where'd that two come from? Here I was could you explain that? Something's unclear. I was focused on trying to fix the question up so that I didn't sound bad to my peers, so that, sometimes I just wouldn't ask a question. I just sort of make a note, like, oh, I should ask that later. And so the environment conditioned me differently, and I hadn't really been exposed to that. And so that was the first time that I felt that different conditioning. And so having this supportive background helped me to be successful in a graduate program where a lot of people of color would drop out. I worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I had two amazing mentors, Lonnie Lane, who's I believe still there today, and the late Claudia Alexander. I've talked about her before. She's been an amazing mentor for me. But working at NASA in and of itself is amazing. What shocked me was I never learned about the other black women computers. The entire 3 summers that I was there, I really only knew about Claudia, and I was impressed by her, but I didn't really know this history. There wasn't like an exhibit that sort of honored past folks who worked at NASA. And so even though I was so close to the organization, I was really far away from its past. But they were amazing. They brought me into the community. That was my first time being in California, in Pasadena. It was amazing. Lonnie had a way of bringing us to the table and making us all equal. And so it really made me feel like I could be a part of this community. My freshman year at Spelman, Dr. Falconer was known for giving out advice. Whether you wanted it, you didn't have to ask. You didn't have to ask. And so I'm walking by and, talking with her. She's like, what are you doing this weekend? I was like, oh, there's this party, Morehouse. So Spelman and Morehouse are right across the street. Morehouse is the all-male HBCU. Spelman's all women. And so, anytime we could find any excuse to fraternize, we found it. And so I told her I was going to this party, and she was like, oh, what have you done? Have you done your homework? And I was like, ooh. I didn't know my mama came to town, right? And so she's sort of checking in, and I was like, well, I was going to get that done after the party, Sunday evening before it's due on Monday. And so she said something like this. I'm going to see if I can get her voice. Talithia, because that's sort of what she, I never corrected her because she was Dr. Falconer. Whatever she called me was fine. Baby, you can be blind in one eye and can't see out the other, but you can always get you a man. What you need to do now is focus on your schooling. Trust me, those men will still be there. Thank you. Words to live by. And so, but she was right, because it's easy to come off to college to not have that parental influence and to get distracted and then to not finish. And so I took that advice to heart that she gave me in that first year. Right? And especially the challenge of majoring in something like math, which was especially difficult at times. Here's the second Falconer mindset that I want to leave you with, is find graduate schools that are not only going to admit, but are going to matriculate and graduate your students. And so she'd been at Spelman long enough to know that lots of graduate students want diverse students of color, and lots of them were willing to bring Spelman students in, but all of them weren't willing to mentor and matriculate them and graduate them. And so she sort of had a list of places we could go to and a list of places we couldn't go to. And she was upfront, like, I will not write a recommendation for you to go to any of these places, right? Because they haven't done right by some of our students. And so I really appreciated that about her. My senior year, she was still giving out advice. And I went to her now because I talked to Dr. Bozeman, I talked to several other faculty about graduate school, I was ready to apply, and I said, you know, Doctor, I felt like I'd done my homework. I said, I want to work with this guy, Carlos Castillo Chavez. He's at Cornell, he's graduated all these, you know, minority PhDs, he's supportive. Like, I just knew she was going to be impressed at the work that I'd done, and she said, I'm not going to write you a recommendation letter for Cornell. And I was like, but they're good. What? Huh? And so then she sort of flips it on me. She says, you're not going to find a husband at Cornell? She was like, it's Ithaca. There aren't any black people in Ithaca. Who's going to do your hair? I was just like, oh, you're right. We won't go there. Where should we go, Doctor? You know, and I'm like, but, you know, I'm thinking freshman year, you told me leave them alone, focus on your school, and now she's like, look, don't leave them alone too long. Now you may want to go somewhere where you're at least gonna happen to run into somebody. But I love that she was so honest. Right? She wasn't just thinking about how can I push you to be the best mathematician, but how can I make sure that you're well-rounded, that you're fulfilling not just what I dream of you, but for what you dream for yourself. Okay? So I ended up in Houston. In transitioning to graduate school, I spent a summer in the EDGE program, which Amy mentioned, Enhancing Diversity in Graduate Education. Woo, EDGE, Women Math Warriors. This is actually on the left, me and my cohort. We were at Bryn Mawr for the summer. You'll see Amy. Notice that she has been sort of in a cryogenic tunnel because she has not aged since the summer of 2000. Rhonda Hughes is here as well, as long as some other women who were in my cohort. What was so amazing, the EDGE program did for me exactly what the summer science program had done in transitioning me to Spelman. It gave me this community of women who were focused, who were going to graduate school together, pursuing mathematics together, and that we could support each other, be each other's cohort to get through graduate school together. We've held the program at Pomona. This is a summer that I was a graduate mentor and have since mentored women who were in the program. I started at Howard University in their Ph.D. program, left with a master's only because I took a stats course and fell in love with it, and they didn't have a statistics program, so I ended up transferring to Rice University. You'll see a picture here with me and my advisor, Kathy Enzer, who was so supportive. I remember I'd go into her and I'd just be like so defeated, feeling like I'm never gonna finish this PhD, and the first thing she'd say was, hello, future Dr. Williams. And I'd be like, don't lie, don't. Have you seen my code? It's not working. There is no future doctor. You know. And so she would always speak life into me, even when I felt like I wasn't going to be successful. And I eventually graduated with my PhD in statistics. Here's what I want to highlight. Do you see that itty bitty person, 2-week-old, at graduation? And I think they might be here, possibly in the back. And so, yes, that is now Josiah, who's our 9-year-old. Oh, time is flying. My baby. All right, you'll see him running around. They're probably somewhere eating now. But to finish PhDs and have a child, that's another talk. That'll be next summer at MathFest. But I do want to highlight another organization that's working tirelessly to do exactly that, which is the National Alliance, which has initially partnered with 4 HBCUs to bring students to Iowa, of all places. Now, if they can do it in Iowa, the rest of us have no excuse, really. If you can get black people to go to Iowa for 5 years and finish a PhD, there's nothing you cannot do. And so, you see Phil here, who's been successful in originating that program, growing that program, and it has since expanded. The last mindset that I'll leave you with is to lift while climbing. And so, Etta Falconer has influenced so many other modern day unhidden figures many of whom are with us today, but who've been affected by her legacy and who continue to live out her legacy. Take a picture of this slide so you can know who to invite to your department colloquium. That's why it's there. That's why. And so I don't know who we can find right here. Here's 8 women that you can reach out to. Make sure you give them a little stipend so they can come too, encourage them to come. And then for me, part of what I want to do is live out that passion. So I love finding ways to motivate women, motivate girls to pursue math as a career, to be that example that I didn't have when I was a kid. We've since created a foundation. So the Sylvia Bozeman and Rhonda Hughes Edge Foundation exists so that we can support young girls, young women, and young women of color to pursue mathematical sciences, whether that's through summer programs, whether that's through a research grant, whatever it takes to really broaden participation in the mathematical sciences, because we see how our country is changing, and we see how we need to really attract more talent into our area. I love this quote by Dr. Falconer. She says, "Perhaps the most rewarding moments have come when younger faculty have undertaken the same goals and surpassed my efforts, reaching out to the broader community to help minorities and women achieve in mathematics." And so for me, that's almost my life goal. What can I do to continue to fulfill her legacy through my own life? And here's some ways that I've attempted to do that. Each year at Harvey Mudd, we have held what we call the Sacred Sisters Conference. It's a conference for girls, underrepresented girls in STEM, to get them excited about STEM. I'm not at a place like Spelman. Harvey Mudd has very few women of color. We're starting to change that. But initially when I came, I didn't see anyone who looked like me in my class. And so I wanted to do something to at least get these girls to campus, to start to introduce them to STEM, to science, to mathematics, to get them excited about it. And so for the past 6 years, I've been supported by our math department and by our institution to host this one-day STEM conference for girls. It took a lot of work. It was sort of initially my idea, but I sort of reached out to get help from different people, from guidance counselors. Claremont's in a very wealthy school district, so a lot of the counselors at Claremont High were willing to come and speak to parents who were coming from all over Southern California, give them some of the resources that they give to their students, which was amazing. Invited college leadership. Having a diversity event on campus and then inviting the president is a win-win. Right, we're gonna have a photographer, you can come, and all these beautiful girls are gonna be here, just remarks, just give a couple remarks, right? And so creating an opportunity, not only for me to be successful and to encourage these students, but for our school to be seen as being inviting, as a place where students could come and see themselves. One side effect of this conference is, initially I reached out to some of my students to volunteer. And I didn't think it'd be a big deal. It's a Saturday. Sorry, you got to get up at 7:30, but come on, it's for a great cause. And what I didn't expect was when students came up to me afterwards and talked about their experience of mentoring these young girls. So they do labs with them, they do exercises, they talk with them over lunch. And, it's hard to have a conversation with students about their privilege because, it can sort of be seen as attacking. And Harvey Mudd's a very privileged place. Even for the black students that are there, it's a wealthy, it's private, it's a pretty elite institution. And so it's hard to engage in a conversation about sort of how good they have it. And yet my students who volunteered could see it because these girls who were so excited about math, they just sparked. And some of them were at schools that didn't have any AP courses. And so they were like, Prof. Williams, how are they going to they can't come to Harvey Mudd if you're at a high school that doesn't have AP courses. I said, you're right. So it has more to do with their zip code than their intellect. It's not that they're not passionate about math. It's just that they're in the wrong zip code. Their school isn't going to prepare them even to get into Harvey Mudd. And so to see my students sort of come back and realize, I never thought twice about being able to go to a great high school. I never thought twice about not applying to the college of my dreams. And just because you go to this school, you live in this neighborhood, you're not going to ever be at Harvey Mudd. The likelihood is pretty slim if you don't have the courses that are going to prepare you to get in. And so that was a lesson that the conference was able to teach them that I wouldn't have been able to necessarily teach them in the classroom. We invited alums to come back to do sessions. We invite local women from the community to come in and form these mentoring relationships with these girls. In the same way that I had those NASA scientists to sort of build in me, I try to recreate those opportunities for those girls to engage in authentic relationships with local women. And what was interesting was the parent workshop. The first year, we didn't know what to do with the parents. They sort of came and they hung out, and we were like, bye. And they were like, I'm not leaving my baby on this campus. And so then we had to come up with things for them to do. So we created this parent workshop where we invited counselors to come and talk to our parents. And now the parents bring their daughters back every year. The girls are like, I'm tired of coming. I've been here for 4 years. And I'm like, that's okay, because your mama wants to come, and that's great. And so we get parents who are like, you were getting out of bed. I'm going to that parent workshop. But that's a great way to pull students because they want to be there, and they also want their parents to come. I'll highlight a few things here. We've been featured in Forbes magazine, an article that talked about the work that we were doing with girls and women of color. Local news often highlights the conference to highlight what's happening in the community, and it also brings great attention to our institution. And so I just want to conclude here with making an impact and how I've sought to continue Dr. Falconer's legacy. One thing that she taught me was to really bring my whole self to wherever I am. And I've been able to do that. It's not independently. I have an amazing family, but also amazing colleagues who love my kids, because I bring them in a minute and like, hold this one while I work on this. Right? And so these are my colleagues, I think with three different children, actually, all boys. But at any point in time, my kids are there in this space, enjoying life with my colleagues, life on our campus. Here's my family. You'll see them running around. You may have seen them already. They tend to dress alike, those three boys do. But it's a balancing act to do this and also to be a mom and a wife and a daughter. An amazing side effect of giving a TED Talk, or at least a TEDx talk, is if it gets upgraded to a TED Talk, which is exactly what happened to my TEDx. And so thank you. Woo! And so the beauty in that is that Dr. Falconer's legacy goes even further. With this has come opportunities to present, to speak at other places, featured this past Saturday in the LA Times for doing a segment at the Orange County Fair. And so these opportunities have been amazing and can really be attributed to Dr. Falconer's legacy, which lives in me. I got to spend a year, my sabbatical year, as an American Council on Education Fellow, where I shadowed a college president. And it gave me the opportunity to think about how to take Dr. Falconer's vision and put it on a grander level. How, as an institutional president or provost or dean, you can really change the culture of a place, more so than I can as just a math major, or math professor who's trying to encourage another department, like, you really should be inclusive. Why should we listen to you? Oh, that's not going to work. And so this program, this year that I spent with other colleagues, here we are at Georgia Tech, Georgetown, and Emory, and then got a chance to meet with other presidents. Here's a president of UMBC and Clemson, Montana State, and John Hopkins. It was an amazing opportunity to see what leadership is like at that level and talk about institutional change and how we can see it on a broader level. And then, once you give a TED Talk, which I encourage you to, people often invite you to come and do other things. And so it's been amazing to travel around the country to talk about education and talk about why we need to broaden participation, especially for those who are underrepresented in our field. I'll end here. I love this quote by Dr. Falconer. I've devoted my entire life to increasing the number of highly qualified African Americans in mathematics and mathematics-related careers. High expectations, the building of self-confidence, and the creation of a nurturing environment have been essential components of the success of these students. They have fully justified my beliefs. Well, I hope I have fully justified her beliefs today. Thank you.